Okay, welcome back to the Ready State. If you're paying attention to the internet right now around fitness and fitness ideas, chances are you're seeing a lot of work being done with a mini band or a monster band. And one of the things I want to talk about is we have an idea and a concept that we make choices that match up with our physiology that allow us to maintain the most capacity we can. So why do I think that this position is better than this position? Well, I can't breathe in this position, but I can breathe more effectively in this position. So I'm in a good position or a more effective position, I have better capacity and better outcome, and more importantly, better biomotor expression, right? Better movement power. So this is all well and good, but when you see people working with mini bands right now, all the hip thrusts, I mean, hip thrust is, we should just call this the COVID hip thrust focus plan. And what's happening right now is we see a lot of people doing monster walks and hip thrusts with their feet straight. Now, that begs a couple questions, like why don't we do it in this position? Well, it turns out most people figure out they're just weak sauce in this position. This is a fine position. It may or may not cause you pain, and that should not even be part of our conversation. But what you're seeing is that people are choosing shapes that give them better access to their power, which is really interesting because if I'm using this to create more muscle function here and better power here or better isometric control here, why wouldn't I be training in this position more often, right? And well, we're starting to see people are. So feet are straighter, and what you see is that I have this little window where I'm still very powerful and very effective, but as soon as I start to go off, I start to lose my effectiveness. Now what's interesting is that we're going to try to give you ways of thinking about working in these less effective shapes. And more importantly, let's continue on this conversation of should I only be working in a position where I have my most power, right? So we know if I have a choice and a practice, I want to default to my most practiced, most powerful shapes, the shapes that give me the most option. So for most of us, when we stand up and we start using the monster band and we're doing monster walks, we see world champions and the best athletes in the world and the strongest athletes in the world, their feet are very straight and they're walking across, keeping the foot straight, keeping the ankle engaged, all those things. What you'll see, or rather what you won't see, is people doing monster walks like this. And that's because we have really poor hip function in this turned out position. We don't really abduct the leg really well, and we don't have lots of control. So it's interesting that maybe at these end ranges, I might choose that position, but what you're seeing is that most of us are pretty smart. We'll get our feet straight. Now, what's interesting is that most of us who are doing these kinds of walks in the home are staying in a range of motion that gives me really strong impact and strong access to these positions, which means most of us are walking in a single position, a single isometric shape. So what I want to show you is that we can zhuzh this up while we're at home, borrowing a skill we call the 27 squats from Jami Tikkanen of the training plan. And the 27 squats is very simple, but what we're going to get out of it is using our hip through bigger ranges of motion, teaching our hips to be strong in less effective positions, and more importantly, using this isometric tool, right, to maintain this position in a whole bunch of more variety than just this, right? And so the pattern is simple. Feet are straight, I'm balanced between the ball of the foot and the heel, ankles in the middle of the feet. And then whatever my squat stance is, squat as deep as you can without disrupting that pattern. So don't come onto your heels, don't lose your ankle, don't lift your toes up and do weird stuff. Just stay balanced, keep that balance, work through a full range that feels good for you, right? That uncompensated squat position. Now, what we can then do, that's position one, is turn the feet out to a weaker position. Now, we're not doing tons of reps here, so I don't think it's going to interrupt how the brain is thinking about my ready shape. But in this really externally rotated near end range position, turns out I have to work really hard and have to have a ton of range of motion. Right now, I've lost the outside of my foot, my arch is collapsed, I'm basically hanging on the inside of my toes, my feet aren't really great, and in order to maintain the integrity of that shape, balance, I have to really have some crazy turnout, like ballet. One of the reasons ballet is so tough, working in really hard shapes. That's position two. Position three is let's take that hip internally rotate it and see how much range we have on it. So I turn those feet in, maintain the arch in the middle. That's a collapsed position, active foot. Give me one squat as deep as you can into this position, maintaining your arch, balance side to side, front to back, and stand back up. So now I've taken my hip into a whole bunch of different positions. It's really unlimited, and through different heights. So instead of only working in this position, suddenly I have making the hip be strong in any position. Well, guess what? That's 3. I can go to a split stance and now work on this position in the back. If my arch is collapsed, that's not a great shape. Doesn't translate well to running. It's basically a collapsed shape. So suddenly, whoop, principles remain the same. I can do that forward, backwards. Give me one squat there. What's available to me? Position 2, arch is up, one squat. Position 3, oh, that's terrible. I'm not going to be able to go very deep because I'm limited to my ankles and hips, but I'm also teaching myself to have access to these positions even in this really strange shape. 3 foot positions, 1, 2, 3, and then as many different orientations that you can think of. And what you're going to see is that instead of just walking laterally at this height, we can suddenly start to be very clever. What does walking laterally at this height look like? Whew, that's much harder. I much prefer this upright shape. And what you'll see is if we just expand our language using the band, we can get a lot more hip function. Training for power, training for reps. Let's go ahead and get into our best shape that translates to the most, gives us the most access to our physiology. But in this moment, we have a real opportunity to improve our range of motion, train in these different positions that are uncompensated, teach my hip to create that isometric, take myself through more ranges of motion, and guess what? We'll come out of this even better movers. See you guys tomorrow.